In the summer of 2013, the life of 8-year-old Cherish Lily Perriwinkle came to a tragic end in Jacksonville, Florida. A convicted sex offender named Donald James Smith, only weeks out of jail, manipulated a struggling single mother to kidnap little Cherish from a local Walmart. The next morning, Cherish's body was found hidden in a creek. The evidence was clear. She had been attacked. This case exposed multiple failures in the child protection and criminal justice systems. In the wake of Cherish's murder, Florida lawmakers called it unthinkable and passed sweeping reforms to the state's sex offender laws. As Representative Matt Gaetz bluntly put it, if the laws we have today were the laws a year or 2 years ago, Cherish Perriwinkle would be alive. In this video, we examine every aspect of this tragedy: the desperate family in need of help, the predatory man lurking, the harrowing night when Cherish vanished, the determined investigation, and the trial that followed. We'll also look at the background of Cherish and her family, the decades-long criminal history of Donald Smith, and the catastrophic system failures that failed to contain him. By understanding what went wrong, we honor Cherish's memory and learn how to prevent similar tragedies in the future. In the weeks leading up to Friday, June 21st, 2013, the Perriwinkle household was the kind of place where love worked harder than money. Cherish lived with her mother, Rain, and her younger sisters, Destiny and Nevaeh, in a world shaped by hardship, but held together by hope. Rain did everything she could to keep her daughters safe, fed, and cared for, even when that meant stretching every dollar until it frayed. The family's car had broken down earlier that month. Their cell phone had been damaged by accident when one of the children dropped it into water. Money was painfully tight. And yet, Rain still tried to give her daughters moments of childhood joy, little outings, simple treats, and mother-daughter time at home. Cherish, the oldest of the three, understood more than a child ever should. She was patient, gentle, nurturing. Whenever her mother felt overwhelmed, Cherish would sit beside her and softly say, "I just want to be like you when I grow up." She played teacher with her sisters. She drew pictures she proudly handed to family members, and she loved reading along with her mother on quiet evenings. She had recently learned how to ride a bicycle without training wheels, and she had smiled so brightly afterward that her mother thought, for a little moment, everything in their lives was going to get better. Rain wanted to send Cherish to visit her biological father the next morning. She needed to find her daughter a simple travel outfit, nothing fancy, just something clean and nice. And so, on that Friday evening, she gathered her 3 young daughters and walked into a Dollar General store, unknowing that a predator had entered the very same place. It was around 7:30 in the evening when Rain walked into the store on Edgewood Avenue West. The aisles were quiet, the lighting dim but warm, the shelves lined with everyday essentials. Cherish's little sisters followed behind their mother, their sandals clicking softly on the tiled floor. Rain saw a simple $7 dress and thought it might work for Cherish's flight the next morning. But when she checked her wallet, the truth stung her. She couldn't afford it. That $7 was too much. She picked it up, stared at it, imagined her daughter wearing it, then slowly put it back. As she did, a man walked near the end of the aisle. His name was Donald James Smith. He was 56 years old, with thinning hair, pale skin, and the unassuming manner of an older neighbor or someone you might see at a grocery store. Nothing about his appearance screamed danger. Nothing would have alerted a mother on a tight budget that this man had been labeled a predator decades ago. Minutes earlier, Smith had walked into Dollar General and asked the cashier if the store sold adult magazines. The cashier had said no. After that, he hadn't left. Instead, he quietly watched Rain and her children as they moved through the store, observing them the way a hunter studies its surroundings. When Rain finally took her children toward the exit, exhausted and empty-handed, she stepped into the parking lot and he was waiting. Smith approached the family with a friendly smile and a soft tone. He introduced himself as Don. He said he had little ones of his own. He said he and his wife had a large Walmart gift card they did not need, somewhere between $100 and $150, and that they wanted to help a family in need. Rain, stunned by this sudden generosity, hesitated. She told him plainly, I don't go with strangers. Smith looked her gently in the eyes and replied, You're safe. I promise you're safe. He mentioned church, charity work, and something called Happy Jacks. He spoke as if he were a volunteer, a family man, someone with a kind heart and a willingness to help. Rain stood there, torn between caution and the crushing reality that she had no money, 3 hungry daughters, and a flight to prepare for the next morning. And so, after a moment of internal battle, she accepted. She would later say in court, through tears, He looked into my face and told me I was safe. If she had known his past, if she had known what the system already knew, she would have run. But no one had warned her. The system that should have kept Smith away from families forever had long since failed. Rain and her daughters climbed into Smith's white 1998 Dodge van. It is one of the most haunting moments in this story. At around 8 o'clock that night, the van rolled into the large Walmart parking lot on Lem Turner Road. Surveillance cameras captured the family walking inside, along with the man who would later be called one of the most dangerous child predators the state had ever seen. Inside Walmart, everything seemed normal at first. Rain pushed a shopping cart. The girls picked out clothes. Smith acted helpful, charming, almost grandfatherly. He said his wife would meet them any minute. He said she was texting him. She never arrived. Throughout the shopping trip, which lasted more than 2 hours, Smith repeatedly isolated little Cherish from her family. He took her to the shoe department. He took her to the women's section. He took her to the dressing room twice. Rain would later think back to those moments, replaying them like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. She remembered Smith urging Cherish to try on women's high-heeled shoes. She remembered saying no, that the heels were too high. She remembered the rope Smith had quietly placed into the shopping cart. She remembered wondering why his wife still hadn't arrived. But most of all, she remembered how desperately she had wanted to believe that someone, anyone, might just be trying to help her. By 10 o'clock, the girls were exhausted and hungry. The store was announcing its closing in 30 minutes. Rain kept checking the time, looking for Smith's wife, looking for a sign that everything was okay. Instead, another moment was approaching, the moment that changed everything forever. At around 10:30, Smith suggested they all grab hamburgers or cheeseburgers from the McDonald's inside Walmart. He offered to take Cherish with him to pick up the food while Rain continued browsing. Rain agreed. It was a decision that still haunts her. Cherish walked away with Smith toward the front of the store in her bright orange dress decorated with fruit patterns. She was skipping behind him, light and innocent, trusting that she would soon return with food. Rain called out to her before she disappeared from view. Her last word to her daughter was, "Cheeseburgers." Surveillance footage captured it all. Instead of turning left toward the McDonald's inside the store, Smith kept walking. Cherish followed him. Together, they walked straight toward the main exit. At 10:44 p.m., they stepped through Walmart's sliding glass doors. The night swallowed them. The cameras framed the last image ever captured of Cherish alive, skipping, unaware, and trusting a man who had spent decades perfecting his ability to fool people exactly like her mother. A witness in the parking lot would later recall seeing Smith's van and hearing him say, "We're going to get cheeseburgers." Those words, spoken casually, hid a horror too great to imagine. Back inside Walmart, time passed. Then fear crept in. Rain began looking around. She checked the McDonald's area. It was closed. She looked toward the checkout lanes. No sign of them. She waited, then waited more. Minutes passed, like hours. Around 10 minutes to 11, panic seized her. She rushed to employees, pleading for help. "Please, call 911. My daughter has been taken." Some employees hesitated. Some didn't understand the urgency. Some were confused. Seconds turned into minutes. Rain's heart was breaking. Her phone was dead. Her daughters were frightened. She kept yelling for someone, anyone, to call the police. At 11:18 p.m., Rain finally held a working phone. The 911 recording would later become one of the most haunting pieces of evidence in the trial. Her voice shook. She cried. She begged. She said, "He took her. He took her away. I feel like a fool. I hope to God he doesn't hurt her. I hope he doesn't do anything to her. Why would he take her unless he's going to hurt her?" Her instinct was clear. Her fear was real. And yet, the system once again failed. The dispatcher did not classify the call as a kidnapping. She did not issue the highest emergency code. She did not believe what Rain was saying. It was a mistake that cost hours that mattered. Police officers arrived quickly, but paperwork did not. A Signal 8 missing person was used, not a Signal 30 kidnapping. It would take until 2:15 a.m., more than 3 hours later, for the case to be officially upgraded. It would take until 4:21 a.m., more than 5 hours after the 911 call for the Amber Alert to go out. During those hours, Smith was alone, with Cherish, and the unimaginable had already happened. Through the night, police officers and helicopters scanned the city. They checked hotels, sex offender addresses, wooded areas, parks, and roadsides. Detectives re-interviewed Rain, collected still frames from Walmart's cameras, and distributed images. At 3:30 a.m., they identified the suspect as Donald James Smith. At 3:40 a.m., Rain identified his picture. By sunrise, Jacksonville was waking up to danger. By 8:34 a.m., a citizen made the call that broke everything open. A white van had been spotted at Highlands Baptist Church. At 8:57, officers saw Smith's van on Interstate 95. At 9:05, they pulled him over. And when K-9 officer Charles Wilkie touched the man's pants, they were soaked from the waist down. Mud clung to his shoes. Grass stuck to his clothing. His voice was calm. His excuses were inconsistent. And Officer Wilkie knew. He whispered, "Oh my God, she's in the water." At 9:20 a.m., Officer Wilkie and his K-9 partner tracked a scent behind Highlands Baptist Church into a grassy marsh near Broward Creek. There, partially submerged in approximately 6 inches of water, covered with leaves, branches, and a fallen tree, lay Cherish Lily Perriwinkle. She was wearing her orange dress. Her little body had been hidden. Wilkie stood guard over her. He protected her from wildlife. He knelt beside her and whispered prayers. He later said, "She looked like she was sleeping. I stayed with her so she wouldn't be alone." It was the moment the entire city of Jacksonville would remember. A moment that changed laws, changed offices, changed lives, and broke a mother's heart. When word spread that Cherish had been found, Jacksonville paused. News traveled from officer to officer, from dispatch to command center, from hospital hallways to living rooms, from police radios to whispered conversations. A little girl, missing through the night, had been discovered in a creek behind a quiet church, and the hearts of parents across the city shattered. Detectives who had been working the case for hours without sleep stopped what they were doing. Some lowered their heads. Some walked outside and sat alone. Even hardened officers felt the emotional weight. Because no matter how long someone serves in law enforcement, the loss of a child is something that stays as heavy as the day it happened. Rain Perriwinkle, waiting desperately for an update, was told the news in a small, fluorescent-lit room. She cried the kind of cry that empties the soul, the kind that leaves no sound because pain has pushed past the voice. Even surrounded by officers and support personnel, she was alone in her grief. One detective quietly said afterward, "There are days on this job you never forget." This was one. Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Valerie Rao, respected and steady, traveled personally to the site. She crouched in the muddy bank near Broward Creek and observed Cherish's body exactly as it was found, half submerged, deliberately hidden under a thick tree limb, branches, rocks, and debris. The scene told a story without words. There were tire tracks nearby. There were footprints that matched Smith's shoes. There were marks in the mud where someone had knelt or moved, the subtle signs of a struggle. And there was Cherish, motionless, still wearing her orange fruit-patterned dress, but exposed from the waist down. Dr. Rao whispered something under her breath that no one heard. Later, she would say that some scenes haunt medical examiners for life, and this was one of them. Cherish's body was transported to the medical examiner's office. The autopsy began early the next morning, performed personally by Dr. Rao. Even with the softest language possible, the truth was devastating. Dr. Rao would later testify in court gently but firmly that Cherish had endured injuries consistent with extreme physical violence and profound assault. But she spoke in clinical, restrained terms, because the courtroom was not a place for shock, it was a place for truth. The cause of death was ruled mechanical asphyxiation. In simpler, careful words, pressure applied to the neck that stopped her breathing. Dr. Rao explained, slow and grieving, that the pressure had lasted several long minutes, and that Cherish would have struggled, tried to breathe, tried to fight, and suffered intensely before losing consciousness. The injuries on her neck matched an object like a cloth or shirt, something wide, not thin. But Dr. Rao never sensationalized. She spoke with respect, with dignity for the child whose story she was telling. She also documented injuries that indicated a violent assault had occurred prior to the killing. At trial, Dr. Rao's voice cracked. She paused. She apologized. She steadied herself. And she continued because someone had to speak for Cherish. While the autopsy was taking place, detectives interviewed Smith. He gave conflicting stories. At one moment, he said he had never seen Cherish. Minutes later, he claimed she jumped out of the van at a stoplight and ran away. He then said he had spent the night smoking crack and didn't know where he was. He later suggested she may have wandered off. He stumbled through explanations that contradicted physical evidence, video footage, DNA results, and witness statements. Detectives saw the truth clearly. He was lying. Every word, every excuse, every story. One detective later testified, "It was like watching a child lie after being caught red-handed, except this was a grown man responsible for something unthinkable." By midday, Jacksonville residents lined up outside Walmart to place flowers in the parking lot. Parents hugged their children tighter that morning. Churches opened their doors for prayer vigils. News outlets, after the delayed Amber Alert, now broadcast Cherish's story nonstop. Her photo, big brown eyes, long dark hair, bright smile appeared on every screen. The community united in grief, outrage, and a shared belief that this should never have been possible. Some cried because they felt helpless. Some cried because they had seen her face on TV overnight and prayed she would be found alive. Some cried because they had daughters who looked like Cherish. As the investigation deepened, reporters began digging into Smith's past. What they found shocked even seasoned journalists. A timeline stretching back more than 4 decades emerged, a timeline with disturbing consistency. 1977. The first known offense. Smith, at 21 years old, exposed himself to a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old. He served 1 year. 1992. The attempted kidnapping of Carrie Ann Buck. He tried to force a 13-year-old into his van. He originally received a 15-year sentence. Appeals reduced it. He served 6 years. 1999. Ready for commitment. Then released. Psychologists deemed him extremely dangerous under the Jimmy Rice Act. But prosecutors dismissed his case after claiming they could not find the victim, who would later testify she was always reachable. 2006. The evaluation that could have saved Cherish. A DCF reviewer stated Smith was dangerous, but then concluded he did not meet commitment criteria. Experts called this failure inexplicable. 2009 and 2012. Charges reduced. Twice, Smith faced felony child targeting charges. Twice, prosecutors reduced them to misdemeanors. 20 days before Cherish's death, Smith begged authorities to commit him under the Baker Act, telling them he was having homicidal thoughts. He was turned away. It was a perfect storm of failures, a twisted accumulation of leniency, missed warnings, ignored evaluations, bureaucratic fog, and legal loopholes. And at the end of that storm was a little girl in an orange dress. Within hours of Smith's arrest, prosecutors began assembling one of the strongest cases Duval County had ever seen. The DNA results alone were overwhelming. Matches from multiple locations, multiple samples, multiple tests. The statistical odds so immense that only an identical twin could match them. Walmart cameras captured 2 hours of footage. They showed Smith with Cherish, walking with her, isolating her, eventually leaving with her. Dollar General cameras captured the first interaction. Rain's calls, police dispatch logs, and Smith's limited phone activity all painted a consistent timeline. Physical evidence. Wet clothes, mud, scratches, items from Dollar General found inside Smith's van, tire marks at the scene. The evidence didn't just point to Smith. It built an airtight box around him. Cases involving children are handled with extraordinary care. This one required even more. Between 2013 and 2018, the prosecution built a detailed narrative. They prepared dozens of witnesses. They reviewed thousands of pages of reports. They coordinated experts, medical professionals, forensic scientists, detectives, and analysts. They reviewed hours of secret jail recordings that revealed Smith's disturbing attitude, lack of remorse, and even predatory comments made about other children touring the jail. They prepared for what many knew would be one of the most emotional trials in Jacksonville history. They also waited because Smith, like many defendants in capital cases, used every possible delay, every motion, every procedural request to slow the trial. But the wheels of justice never stopped turning. And on February 12, 2018, the trial began. Day 1 of the trial. The courtroom was full. Reporters lined the back wall. Family members sat holding tissues. Prosecutors sat with binders thicker than textbooks. Defense attorneys had their laptops open, scanning notes. Smith sat in a suit, looking smaller than he had at the time of the crime, his hair whiter, his face gaunt, a man who had aged quickly during 5 years in jail. Judge Mallory Cooper, known for fairness and precision, took her seat. Then the jury entered 12 people who would witness some of the most painful testimony imaginable, and the state called its first witness. Rain Perriwinkle. She walked slowly. She sat down. She closed her eyes for a moment, grounding herself. Her voice trembled at first, but strengthened as she told Cherish's story. She spoke about poverty, about Dollar General, about Smith's offer, about wanting so badly to believe him. She spoke about Walmart, about the 2-hour shopping trip, about the rope in the cart, about the high heels, about the dressing room, about her last word to Cherish being cheeseburgers. She spoke about the 911 call. She spoke about fear and regret. Her tears were quiet, not dramatic. She tried to stay composed. She tried not to break fully, because she wanted them, the jurors, to understand exactly what happened, without filter, without embellishment. And then something nobody expected happened. When Rain finished her testimony, Smith leaned toward his attorneys and whispered, "Do not cross-examine her." He refused to let them question her. He said, "I don't want her to go through anything she doesn't want to." For a moment, even the courtroom froze. Not because it was kindness, but because it was unusual. Rain cried again, this time not from fear or shame, but from the emotional weight of the moment. And then the trial moved on. Officer after officer took the stand. Patrol officers, detectives, forensic specialists, surveillance analysts, missing child coordinators. Each one added a piece to the timeline. The officer who handled the initial 911 call admitted she misclassified it. Detectives explained how the classification error delayed resources. Supervisors testified they wished they had acted sooner. Officers described the sweeping overnight hunt that touched hotels, highways, wooded areas, and neighborhoods. When Officer Wilkie took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. He described finding the van. He described the wet pants. He described following Gator toward the creek. He described kneeling beside Cherish's body. His voice broke once. He apologized. Judge Cooper nodded gently, allowing him a moment. He said, "I stayed with her until she wasn't alone. I needed to keep her safe." One juror wiped tears. So did several reporters. When Dr. Rao testified, she did so with extraordinary care. She did not use graphic terms. She did not sensationalize. She spoke softly. She paused often. She requested a break when her voice shook. She explained Cherish's cause of death using precise, clinical terms, avoiding any details that would violate courtroom decorum or traumatize the jury. She described only what was necessary, nothing more. And yet the jurors, many of them parents, understood everything. Some looked down at the floor. Some held tissue to their faces. Even seasoned prosecutors looked away for parts of her testimony. When Dr. Rao finished, there was no doubt. The state had proven its case. Then came the recordings. Dozens of hours of jail conversations, secretly captured in the air vents between cells. Smith did not know he was being recorded. He did not hide his thoughts. He made disturbing comments about young girls touring the jail, his preferences, the publicity surrounding the case, how he believed this would be one of the biggest cases Jacksonville had ever seen. In one horrifying moment, he said, "That's right up my alley." In another, "She had to go." When those recordings were played, several jurors shifted in their seats, visibly uncomfortable. Some looked disgusted. One juror clenched her jaw. After the final recording ended, the prosecutors rested their case. They had built a wall of evidence around Smith that no defense could break. The defense did not claim Smith was innocent. They did not deny the events. They did not challenge most of the evidence. Instead, they argued, Smith suffered from mental illness. Smith had lifelong impulse control issues. The system failed to keep him off the streets. Society bore some responsibility for allowing him to remain free. It was not a defense of innocence. It was a defense aimed at avoiding the death penalty. But it did not sway the jury. Not after hearing Rain. Not after hearing Wilkie. Not after hearing Dr. Rao. Not after hearing Smith's own twisted words. In capital murder trials, verdicts sometimes take hours, even days. This one took 19 minutes. The jury returned. The courtroom stood. The judge asked for the verdicts. The clerk read, "Guilty, guilty, guilty." On all counts. Rain sobbed quietly. Prosecutors placed gentle hands on her shoulders. Smith remained expressionless. Reporters typed furiously. The judge thanked the jury, recessed the court, and scheduled the penalty phase. Justice had spoken, but one more step remained. 1 week after the guilty verdict, the courtroom filled once again. This time, the jury wasn't deciding guilt. That chapter was already closed. Now, they were deciding whether Donald James Smith would spend the rest of his life behind bars or receive the ultimate punishment under Florida law. The atmosphere in the courtroom was different, heavier, quieter, more solemn. Because now the focus shifted from the evidence of what happened to the question of what society should do with the man responsible. Under Florida law, a death sentence requires a unanimous vote. Every juror must agree, every single one. That means 12 hearts must align, 12 minds must weigh. The aggravating factors, the mitigating factors, the cruelty of the crime, the future danger, and the value of justice. It is not simply a legal decision. It is a moral one. To humanize Smith, the defense called several witnesses. They wanted to show he had a troubled childhood. He struggled with mental health. He suffered cognitive limitations. He spent most of his life institutionalized. And the system repeatedly mishandled him. Their hope was simple: convince even one juror that life in prison was punishment enough. The first witness the defense called was Donald James Smith, Jr., Smith's adult son. He appeared on video from a remote location. He talked about growing up with an absent father, a father who drifted in and out of jail, a father who never learned how to be present, a father who, despite everything, he still loved. "No one can replace my dad," he said. Some jurors looked sympathetic. Some looked conflicted. Others looked unmoved. Because grief for a child often outweighs sympathy for a man who caused such devastation. The defense then made a decision that would later become one of the most heavily scrutinized choices in the entire case. They called Dr. Heather Holmes, a seasoned forensic psychologist who had interviewed Smith. They likely believed her medical insights could demonstrate impaired judgment, reduced self-control, psychiatric disorders, diminished capacity, and a lifetime of unaddressed issues. Instead, her testimony took a direction the defense never anticipated. Under cross-examination, Dr. Holmes said, "Donald Smith is one of the most dangerous offenders I have ever evaluated." She said he had been a threat since adolescence. She said his risk to re-offend was extraordinarily high. She said he blamed Cherish for trusting him. She said he expressed no remorse. Her words hit the jury like a hammer. Even the prosecutor appeared surprised by how strongly Dr. Holmes condemned Smith. The defense panel exchanged glances. They knew the testimony had shattered their strategy. A defense attorney later admitted, "Her testimony was the moment we knew our mitigation was lost." To illustrate Smith's long-standing threat to children, the prosecution called one witness during the penalty phase. Carrie Ann Buck, the 13-year-old girl Smith attempted to kidnap in 1992. Now an adult, she stepped into the courtroom slowly, her hands trembling slightly, but her head held high. She began recounting her childhood memory. A van pulling up beside her. A man showing her magazines she should never have seen. A demand to get in the van now. A chase. A terror she never forgot. Her voice cracked when she said, "He looked at me like he wanted to end my life." Then she added words that silenced the room. 25 years ago, he tried to take me. In 2013, he succeeded, and Cherish paid the price. Jurors visibly swallowed their emotions. Some blinked away tears. Others clenched their jawlines. The connection was undeniable. This was not a one-time act. This was a pattern, a long, terrifying pattern. Prosecutors presented 5 aggravating factors, reasons the death penalty was justified under law. These included: 1. The murder occurred during a kidnapping and assault. This made it a capital crime under Florida statute. 2. The victim was under 12 years old. Cherish was 8. A child. Vulnerable. Trusting. 3. Smith had a prior violent felony. The 1992 attempted kidnapping of Carrie Ann. 4. The crime was especially cruel. Based on evidence and medical findings, prosecutors argued Cherish suffered immensely. 5. The crime was calculated to avoid arrest. Smith killed her because she could identify him. Each factor weighed heavily in the jurors' minds. Defense attorney Julie Schlacks took the podium. Her voice shook, not from fear of the courtroom she was experienced, but from the sheer emotional gravity. She argued Smith had lifelong neurological issues. He had diminished capacity. He was the product of a broken system. He lived nearly his entire life institutionalized. His crimes stemmed from untreated pathology, not pure malice. She said, "He is a very damaged human being. He was born broken, and the system failed to contain him." She did not deny the tragedy. She did not minimize Cherish's suffering, but she begged the jury to see Smith as a sick man rather than a monster. Some jurors listened with compassion. Others looked unmoved. State Attorney Melissa Nelson delivered the final argument. She spoke softly, with sorrow, not anger. She held up a photograph of Cherish, smiling, radiant, full of life. Then she held a courtroom-approved image from the crime scene, not graphic, but enough to show the stark difference between life and loss. Her voice tightened as she said, "This little girl spent the last moments of her life in terror. She trusted him, and he betrayed her in the worst possible way." She pointed to Smith. He saw vulnerability. He saw opportunity. And he made decisions that ended a child's life. Then she paused long enough that the silence filled the entire room. Finally, she said, "Justice for Cherish requires the highest sentence our law allows." Jurors left the courtroom to deliberate. Their task was monumental. Their duty was heavy. But after everything they had heard, after hearing Rain's voice crack on the stand, after seeing the footage of Cherish skipping toward the exit, after hearing Officer Wilkie describe finding her, after listening to Dr. Rao try not to cry, after hearing Smith's chilling own words, after seeing the pain in Carrie Ann's eyes, there was very little left to debate. The jury returned. The courtroom stood once again. Judge Cooper asked the foreperson, "Has the jury reached a unanimous recommendation?" The foreperson nodded. "We have." Judge Cooper continued, "And what is your recommendation?" The foreperson read aloud, "Death. 12 voices. 1 decision. Unanimous." On May 2nd, 2018, Judge Mallory Cooper delivered the formal sentence. Reporters filled every available seat. Rain sat in the front row, holding a tissue, trembling slightly. Smith sat with his attorneys, expression flat. Judge Cooper spoke calmly, every word deliberate. She recounted the evidence. She acknowledged the jury's unanimous recommendation. She honored Cherish's memory. Then she looked directly at Smith and said, "You have forfeited your right to life among us. You have forfeited your right to life at all. Then, may God have mercy on your soul." And with that, she sentenced him to death for the murder, to life in prison for the kidnapping, and to life in prison for the assault. Rain wept. One juror cried softly. The courtroom exhaled a breath it had been holding for 5 years. Justice, imperfect in its timing but resolute in its outcome, had been delivered. Even after sentencing, capital cases do not end quickly. The appeals process is extensive, often spanning years or even decades. Smith's case moved through the Florida Supreme Court. In April of 2021, they affirmed the conviction and the death sentence. The United States Supreme Court. In 2022, they declined to hear the appeal. Post-conviction hearings. In 2023 and 2024, Smith's attorneys tried to argue that his defense team had been ineffective, but Judge Cooper rejected those claims. Current status. As of late 2025, Smith remains on death row at Union Correctional Institution. He is now 69 years old. No execution date has been set. The wheels of justice continue to turn slowly, steadily, as they often do in capital cases. While the legal system handled Smith, the child welfare system had to make decisions about Cherish's surviving sisters. Soon after the tragedy, Destiny and Nevaeh were placed into protective custody by the Department of Children and Families. Rain was given a reunification plan. She tried, but grief overwhelmed her. Her mental health spiraled. Employment was difficult. Public judgment was cruel. She struggled to complete the requirements. Over time, supervised visits were reduced. Ultimately, a court terminated her parental rights. Destiny and Nevaeh were adopted by relatives in Australia, where they have remained since 2017. Rain said through tears, "I lost all 3 of my girls. Cherish is the biggest victim, but Destiny and Nevaeh are victims too." Her grief never ended, it simply changed shape. Cherish was buried at Riverside Memorial Park. Hundreds attended her funeral. Thousands watched the live stream. More than 1,900 people signed her memorial guest book, though only a fraction had known her personally. In 2022, her family removed her headstone due to repeated vandalism. Her grave is now unmarked, but not unloved. People still leave flowers. People still pause beside the grass. People still whisper prayers. And they always know exactly where she rests. Cherish's death sparked something rare in modern politics: swift, bipartisan, statewide reform. In 2014, the Florida legislature passed the most comprehensive overhaul of sex offender laws in more than a decade. Key improvements included: 1. Expanded civil commitment review. Now, prosecutors, judges, and arresting agencies can all refer offenders. 2. Children's cases no longer depend on prison sentencing. Offenders in county jail can be reviewed. 3. Probation now begins after civil commitment, not during. This closes a loophole that allowed Smith to avoid supervision. 4. Mandatory minimum sentences increased. 5. Tighter monitoring requirements. 6. No more possession of inappropriate materials. 7. Greater oversight of psychiatric evaluations. Multiple lawmakers publicly stated, if these laws had existed earlier, Cherish would be alive. The laws now exist because she is not. It is a tragedy that sparked change, a heartbreak that saved others, a loss that became a lesson written into state legislation. Cherish's case forced Florida to confront an uncomfortable reality. It was not one failure that cost her life. It was many. Layered, interconnected, avoidable. Among them, the 1999 dismissal of Smith's civil commitment case, the 2006 DCF evaluation that misjudged him, the 2009 plea deal that lowered charges to misdemeanors, the 2012 plea deal that did the same, the refusal to Baker Act him days before the crime, the lack of probation oversight after civil commitment, the slow classification of Rain's 911 call, the delayed Amber Alert, The delayed involvement of homicide. The slow media notifications. The failure to identify the danger sooner. Each failure was a domino. When the final one fell, a child was gone. Cherish Lily Perriwinkle lived for 8 beautiful years. She laughed. She played. She drew pictures. She loved her sisters. She loved her mother. She dreamed of becoming like her mom. She was a child, innocent, trusting, joyful. Her story is devastating, but it matters. Because telling her story protects other children. Because remembering her pushes lawmakers to do better. Because acknowledging systemic failures forces society to strengthen its safeguards. Because honoring her life gives meaning to the reforms that followed. Her name became a movement. Her case reshaped Florida law. Her story educated millions about predatory behavior. Her life became a reason for better training, faster responses, and tighter supervision. Her tragedy became a catalyst for protection measures across the state. Cherish did not survive the night of June 21, 2013. But her legacy lives on. In legislation, in reforms, in awareness campaigns, in child safety programs, in parental vigilance, in specialized training for dispatchers, in improvements to the Amber Alert process, and in the hearts of those who remember her face, her smile, her bright orange dress. In the days that followed the discovery of Cherish's body, Jacksonville became a different city. People who had never met the Perriwinkle family felt connected to their grief. Strangers brought food, flowers, toys, and candles to makeshift memorials outside the Dollar General and Walmart. Local churches opened their doors for vigils. Schools held moments of silence. Community leaders expressed sorrow and frustration. But what stood out most was the collective sense of anger, not the kind directed at one man alone, but at a system that had known, for decades, who Donald Smith was. Parents demanded answers. Community members wrote letters to officials. Journalists uncovered more and more details about systemic failures. And through it all, Cherish's smiling school photo appeared in newspapers, on television screens, and across social media. She became the symbol of both heartbreak and reform. People wrote messages like, "We failed you, Cherish. Never again. We will not forget your name." In a way, her loss forced Jacksonville and all of Florida to confront truths that had been ignored too long. One of the earliest and most painful revelations involved the 911 call made by Rain at 11:18 that night. The dispatcher who answered the call later admitted, "I did not believe her." She classified the incident as a Signal 8, a missing person, rather than a kidnapping. This decision affected everything. Resources deployed, speed of response, escalation to homicide, activation of the Amber Alert, media involvement, search intensity. It became a defining example in law enforcement trainings across the state. Experts reviewed the call and concluded, had it been classified properly, had the urgency been recognized, had the Amber Alert gone out sooner, the response would have been faster. Investigators could not say for certain whether Cherish could have been saved. The timeline of the crime was brutally short, but the delay was unacceptable. After internal investigations concluded, dispatchers across Jacksonville received updated training. A new protocol required automatic supervisor review for child-involved calls. Classification guidelines were rewritten for clarity. Immediate media notifications became mandatory. The dispatcher involved received disciplinary action and additional training. For many officers and dispatchers, that night became a lasting lesson. Never underestimate a mother's fear. National outlets picked up the story within hours of the Amber Alert's release. Reporters traveled from across the country. The story was covered by local Jacksonville stations, the Florida Times-Union, the Associated Press, major national broadcast networks, online, true crime communities, advocacy groups for missing children. The narrative resonated for several reasons. One, a child trusted a man who seemed kind. It reminded parents everywhere that danger does not always look dangerous. Two, a mother did what she could with what she had. Rain's poverty was exploited. Predators know how to identify vulnerability. 3, the system ignored red flags for decades. Documents released during the trial revealed just how many opportunities officials had to intervene. 4, The crime was preventable. This word, preventable, became the core of the entire public reaction. 5. The reforms born from the case gave her story power beyond tragedy. Cherish's name became part of conversations about child safety legislation, sex offender monitoring, civil commitment reforms, and emergency reporting protocols. After the sentencing, Rain lost more than her daughter. She lost her home. She lost her remaining children to the foster care system. She lost her privacy. She lost her sense of self. She lost the small, quiet life she had built with Cherish and her sisters. Everywhere she went, someone recognized her. Some people offered support. Some offered sympathy. Others offered judgment, harsh words, and cruel assumptions. The media dug into her background, discussing old DCF investigations, her poverty, her mental health history, her previous custody battle. But what the public often forgot was this. None of those things excused what happened. None of them justified a predator's actions. None of them erased the systemic failures. Rain made mistakes like any human being, but she did not kill her daughter. She did not commit a crime. She did not harm anyone. She was a mother who trusted the wrong person in a moment of need. Rain attended therapy. She met with grief counselors. She tried to rebuild her life. But grief is not linear, and guilt is even more complex. In one interview years later, she said, "Every night I close my eyes and see her skipping. I can't stop it." Her life became a daily attempt to move forward while carrying a weight no parent should bear. On June 27, 2013, a viewing was held at Paxson Revival Center Church, the family's home church. More than 1,900 people signed the guest book. Only about 30 of them had known Cherish personally. The rest were strangers, parents, grandparents, teachers, police officers, community members, all united by grief. Dozens of bouquets surrounded her small white casket. Soft music played over the speakers. Family members wore purple, Cherish's favorite color. Pastor Steve Dobbs spoke gently, saying, "Her life was short, but her impact is great." Some mourners cried openly. Some prayed silently. Some stood in the back, unable to find words. On June 28th, she was laid to rest at Riverside Memorial Park. A light summer rain began as the coffin was lowered, a moment many who witnessed it described as the sky crying with them. For years, visitors brought flowers. They left toys and stuffed animals. Someone often left a single orange in memory of her dress. When her headstone was removed in 2022 due to vandalism, the grave became unmarked, but never forgotten. Highlands Baptist Church, located on Rutgers Road, became a place of pilgrimage for some residents. People would park nearby, walk toward the grassy marsh area, and stand quietly. Some prayed. Some cried. Some simply stood still, letting the silence speak for them. Church members placed flowers and offerings near the creek. One member said, "We have to honor her, even if all we can do is stand where she was." The church later added child safety programs and partnered with law enforcement for community safety seminars. Cherish's story encouraged them to do more, to protect more children, to educate more families, to stay vigilant. Florida legislators read through the case file with growing disbelief. One lawmaker said, "It was like a checklist of everything that could go wrong." And so, in early 2014, lawmakers began drafting reforms. They consulted prosecutors, victim advocates, child psychologists, law enforcement, forensic experts, civil commitment specialists, community leaders. They conducted hearings. They reviewed decades of data. They analyzed loopholes in the Jimmy Rice Act. They scrutinized plea deals that downgraded felony offenses. They examined why Smith was not confined after repeated offenses. When the reforms passed, it was with overwhelming support. Both political parties backed the measures. Both chambers approved the changes decisively. The governor signed them swiftly. The reforms strengthened civil commitment reviews, extended sentencing for serious offenses, required mandatory reporting of vehicle access, improved community supervision protocols, tightened restrictions on offenders, expanded eligibility for confinement, heightened parole officer powers, and mandated cooperation with address verification. The changes were sweeping more than a decade's worth of overdue repairs made in a single year because of one child's story. A representative said, "We owe this to Cherish." The Jacksonville Sheriff's Office conducted a 74-page internal review of the case. It concluded, communication breakdowns hindered the search. A new memo about media contact had added confusion. Dispatch classification mistakes caused delays. Detectives hesitated to escalate the case, and important warnings were not shared quickly enough. As a result, 6 officers received disciplinary action. Some were reprimanded. Some were reassigned. Some underwent additional training. New child abduction protocols were created. Mandatory immediate kidnapping classification for children. Immediate media notification for potential abductions. New criteria for activating Amber Alerts. New supervisory oversight. Updated dispatcher training modules. Rapid mobilization of homicide detectives for any suspicious disappearance. Florida law enforcement agencies shared these protocols statewide. And Cherish's case began appearing in training academies as a scenario lesson so that recruits would learn exactly what went wrong and how to prevent it from happening again. After losing his appeals, Smith filed a 78-page motion in 2023 claiming ineffective assistance of counsel. He argued that his own defense team should have moved the trial, should have objected to more evidence, should have challenged the 911 audio, should not have called Dr. Holmes, should have cross-examined Rain, should have prepared different mitigation strategies. But the court reviewed all evidence, including his own instructions to his lawyers, his recorded conversations, his praise of his attorneys after the verdict, and the overwhelming evidence of guilt. Judge Mallory Cooper denied the motion. On May 13, 2024, she ruled that the defense had performed reasonably and that the outcome would not have changed regardless. Smith remained on death row. Perhaps no one articulated the tragedy better than Rain herself. In interviews years later, she said, "She trusted him because I trusted him, and I have to live with that." She also said, "I loved my daughter. She was my best friend. And if I were rich, this would not have happened. Poverty put me in that position. Poverty is dangerous." Her words resonated far beyond Jacksonville. They echoed the haunting truth that vulnerability, financial, emotional, situational, can be exploited by those looking for it. Cherish was not taken because her mother didn't love her. She was taken because a predator recognized a moment of need. To understand Cherish fully, one must imagine the little girl she was. She loved drawing pictures. She giggled when she played with her sisters. She loved dressing up in her mother's clothes. She watched movies with Rain on the couch. She was shy but sweet at school. She was proud when she finally rode her bicycle without training wheels. She dreamed of being a teacher. She told her mother she wanted to look just like her when she grew up. She sang quietly under her breath when she was happy. She had a favorite orange dress. Her life mattered. Her dreams mattered. Her laughter mattered. And though she is no longer here, her impact spans far beyond her short time on Earth. When you tell the story of Cherish Perriwinkle, you must do it with care. You must do it with respect. You must avoid sensationalism. Because this is not the story of a monster. It is the story of a child. A child whose final hours were filled with confusion, fear, and betrayal. A child who trusted when she should have been safe. A child who lived only 8 years but changed an entire state's laws. A child whose memory now protects countless others. A child who deserved so much more than the world gave her. Her legacy is threefold. 1. Legislative change. Her case led to sweeping reforms in sex offender management. 2. Systemic accountability. Agencies improved protocols and oversight. 3. Public awareness. Parents became more vigilant. Communities became more aware. Officers received better training. Her story continues to be taught, discussed, and remembered. Cherish Lily Perriwinkle lived a short life, but her impact remains immeasurable. She did not choose what happened to her. She did nothing wrong. She was a child caught in the crossfire of systemic failures, and one man's predatory intent. But her story changed Florida. It changed laws. It changed procedures. It changed hearts. And it stands as a stark reminder that the safety of children is not guaranteed. It must be protected, nurtured, and fought for every single day. When we honor Cherish's story, when we learn from what happened, when we work to prevent another tragedy, we ensure that her light, though brief, continues to shine. May she be remembered. May she be honored. May she never be forgotten. This is the legacy of Cherish Lily Perriwinkle. Before we close this chapter, I want to thank you for taking the time to remember Cherish. Stories like hers matter, not just because of the tragedy, but because of what we can learn, what we can change, and who we choose to protect moving forward. If you have thoughts about this case, or insight you want to share, feel free to leave a comment below. Your perspective helps keep these stories alive, and it helps build a community that cares about truth, awareness, and accountability. And if you'd like to join me for future investigations into cold cases and forgotten victims, make sure you subscribe to Cold Case Desk. Your support helps bring more of these important stories to light. Thank you for watching, and stay safe.